For more than a week now, mass protests have been shaking Iran. Every day, more people are taking to the streets, openly challenging the Islamist regime in Tehran. What started as localized unrest is rapidly expanding, and for the first time in years, the Iranian leadership appears unable to contain the situation quickly or decisively. The regime is under enormous pressure, and many observers believe it may be closer to collapse than ever before. A swift and violent suppression, which worked in the past, is becoming increasingly difficult. That is why we need to take a closer look at what is really happening inside Iran right now. How did these protests begin? How far have they already spread? And could the rule of the mullahs actually come to an end? When we talk about the current protests in Iran, many Western media outlets present a very incomplete picture. According to the dominant narrative, these demonstrations are simply about the rapid collapse of the currency and the resulting surge in prices. But this explanation falls far short of reality. In truth, the current unrest is part of a much longer struggle. For decades, Iranians have repeatedly risen up against the regime as a whole. What we are witnessing now is not just an economic protest, but a renewed phase of a broader fight for freedom and dignity. Increasingly, these demonstrations are about the overthrow of the Islamist regime itself. That does not mean economic factors are irrelevant. On the contrary, they are the immediate trigger. But they are symptoms of a much deeper crisis. To understand why Iran is erupting now, we need to look at two major issues that are driving people into the streets. The first is a severe and ongoing water crisis. Large parts of Iran are running out of water. Groundwater levels are collapsing, and in many regions, even basic drinking water is becoming scarce. This is not a sudden disaster, but the result of years of mismanagement, poorly planned dam projects, and excessive extraction of underground water reserves. Entire regions are drying out, and even Tehran is increasingly affected. The regime has known about this problem for years, yet it has failed to provide any meaningful solution. For many Iranians, this alone is proof that the leadership is either incapable or unwilling to protect the population's most basic needs. The second major factor is the state of Iran's economy. Years of corruption, mismanagement, international sanctions, and massive spending on foreign militias and proxy groups have pushed the economy to the brink. Inflation is soaring, wages are collapsing, and the national currency is in free fall. Public anger has intensified further in recent months as the regime's prestige projects have failed spectacularly. Israel has been able to strike key elements of Iran's nuclear program with little resistance, exposing the regime's military weakness. At the same time, Tehran's regional proxies, including Hamas and Hezbollah, have suffered heavy losses. Many Iranians are now openly asking why billions are spent on foreign militant groups while their own country is sinking into poverty and chaos. The immediate spark came on December 28th, when Iran's currency plunged overnight to a new record low. Prices exploded almost instantly. The next day, merchants in Tehran went on strike and called on the wider population to join them. Since then, the protests have continued to spread across the country. It is important to understand that while currency collapse and water shortages triggered the unrest, the demands of the protesters go much further. As demonstrations grow, calls for the complete overthrow of the regime are becoming louder and more explicit. Chants like "Death to the dictator" are now common, and the regime has responded in the only way it knows, with violence. Clashes between protesters and security forces are intensifying. Each day, new regions join the movement. What began with shopkeepers and traders in Tehran has now spread to cities and towns across the country. Ethnic minorities, including Baloch communities, are increasingly taking part, further expanding the scale of the uprising. Reports indicate that protests have already taken place in around 100 cities. The regime's security forces, including the Basij and the Revolutionary Guards, are responding brutally. At least 17 people have already been killed. In some areas, security forces appear overwhelmed. There are reports of police stations being overrun and government buildings coming under attack. In an attempt to regain control, the regime has imposed severe internet restrictions. Large parts of the country are effectively cut off from the outside world. This is meant to disrupt coordination between protesters and prevent images of violence from spreading. But it also suggests fear inside the leadership. One major difference compared to past uprisings is the international context. In previous years, the regime crushed protests with extreme violence, killing hundreds in 2019 and 2022. This time, that option carries far greater risks. US President Donald Trump has publicly warned Tehran against mass killings of protesters, threatening American intervention if peaceful demonstrators are slaughtered. While Trump is often criticized for aggressive rhetoric without follow-through, Tehran has reason to take these warnings seriously. Just months ago, the United States demonstrated its willingness to strike Iran directly, with B-2 bombers targeting key elements of Iran's nuclear infrastructure. Israel, too, has made it clear that it would welcome the collapse of the Iranian regime. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has repeatedly stated that freeing the Iranian people and ending the rule of the mullahs aligns with Israel's strategic goals. Together, this severely limits how brutally Tehran can respond without risking a wider conflict. At the same time, the regime finds itself increasingly isolated. There are reports of a small number of Russian transport aircraft landing in Tehran, possibly delivering equipment or supplies. But this support appears limited and symbolic. Russia is deeply tied down in Ukraine and lacks the capacity to meaningfully intervene. Even these flights reportedly originated from Belarus, highlighting how stretched Moscow's resources have become. All of this means the Iranian leadership is under pressure unlike anything it has faced before. A collapse is not guaranteed, and the regime still controls powerful security forces. But the chances of real change are higher now than at any point in decades. If the regime were to fall, the consequences would extend far beyond Iran. The financial lifeline to groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis would likely be cut. That alone could reshape the security landscape of the Middle East. A free Iran could mean greater stability for the region and relief for populations long suffering under proxy warfare and terrorism. In the end, the question is no longer whether Iran is in crisis. That is beyond doubt. The real question is whether this moment will finally lead to lasting change. The opportunity for freedom has rarely been this close. Whether it becomes reality now depends on how far the protests can go and how much pressure the regime can still withstand.